Some deaths are clean, a bullet, a sickness, a slow decay of the body until there's nothing left but bones and memories. But drowning is different. The ocean takes its time. It fills your lungs, inch by inch, dragging you into the abyss where the world forgets you ever existed. My father didn't just drown, he was taken. His boat was found empty one morning, drifting just beyond the reef, tangled in something that wasn't seaweed. The fishermen said it was just an accident, that he had fallen in. But my grandmother, Lola Ising, knew better. She called it the mermaid's debt. Your father made a bargain with the sea, she told me when I was 10, and the sea came to collect. I grew up in a town where the ocean was everything. We ate from it. We lived by it. We feared it. San Esteban wasn't like the places you see in travel magazines. There were no white sand beaches, no tourists sipping coconut water under the sun. Our shores were sharp, jagged, the waves restless even on a calm day, and past the old reef, the water turned black, dropping into an abyss so deep no one had ever seen the bottom. When I was 12, I asked Manong Lando, one of the oldest fishermen, why no one ever fished past the reef. Because some things don't belong to us, kid, and if you take something from them, they will take something from you. By the time I turned 20, I knew the stories by heart. How men disappeared at sea with only the scent of sweet perfume lingering in the air. How bodies were found days later smiling, their lungs filled with seawater even though they had never drowned. And then I learned the most important rule. If you hear singing, you must never, ever answer. 15 years later, I came back. Not because I wanted to, but because something was calling me home. San Esteban hadn't changed much. The same crumbling houses, the same boats bobbing in the harbor, the same people whispering in hushed voices when they saw me. They knew why I was back, and they didn't like it. That night I went to the docks, the place where my father's boat had washed ashore all those years ago. And I heard it, a song floating on the wind, soft, wordless, beautiful. The humming grows louder. I should have run, I should have prayed, but instead, I listened. The next morning I woke up with sand on my feet and salt in my hair, but I hadn't gone near the water. I needed answers, not just old fishermen's tales, but proof. If the mermaid was real, if she had taken my father, then I needed to see her with my own eyes. I spent days researching, old accounts, missing person reports, stories buried in forgotten records. They all pointed to the same thing. No one who saw her ever came back the same. But I wasn't like them. I wasn't just another fisherman lost at sea. I was here for revenge, and I needed a team. Hunting a mermaid isn't like chasing a ghost. You need science, technology, a plan that won't get you killed. So I reached out to the best. Dr. Miguel Santiago, a marine biologist who had spent his career studying unclassified deep-sea creatures. He thought I was insane until I showed him the sonar scans from past shipwrecks. Ana Delgado, cryptozoologist, famous for tracking myths that turned out to be real. She laughed when I told her I wanted to catch a mermaid. She stopped laughing when I told her where we were going. Captain Torres, an ex-Navy diver who had seen things in the deep that weren't in any official reports. He didn't ask questions. He just wanted to know how much we were getting paid. One by one they agreed. Not because they believed me, but because if I was right, we'd be making history. We set sail in a week, and by the time we return, we'll have proof that something waits beneath the waves. Something is coming. I can feel it. The same way my father must have felt it, that last night before he vanished. But this time, I won't just be listening. This time, I'm hunting. If you want to catch something, you have to understand it first. You don't set a trap without knowing what it's for. So before we even stepped onto the boat, we had to find clues, evidence of past encounters, recorded sightings, and most importantly, the patterns of disappearance surrounding the mermaids. The team gathers in a dimly lit room, surrounded by maps and documents. The first clue was found in the old church archives of San Esteban, buried under records of typhoons and missing fishing boats. It wasn't just random disappearances. The pattern was cyclical, occurring every 3 years under the full moon closest to the monsoon season. I traced my father's disappearance. It matched. I traced other cases, fishermen, divers, even a young couple who went for a night swim and never surfaced, all vanished under the same conditions. The Mermaids doesn't just hunt randomly, I muttered. She waits. She chooses. We also gathered modern evidence, Coast Guard logs, sonar scans, and the only surviving eyewitness report we could find. A video begins playing, static, then the shaky voice of an old fisherman. She looked human, but not, the man muttered. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then she opened her mouth. Her teeth were too sharp, and her voice was inside my head. Dr. Santiago leaned forward. So she's not just a predator, she's a psychic lure. She draws you in before she strikes. That meant we couldn't rely on our ears alone. We weren't just dealing with a deep-sea creature, we were dealing with something that could think. Something that could manipulate perception. So our equipment had to be precise, resistant to her influence, and most importantly, lethal if necessary. The biggest danger wasn't the mermaid's claws or even her teeth. It was her voice. If we heard her song, we were as good as dead. So Captain Torres suggested military-grade noise-canceling dive helmets, modified with an active white noise generator to block external low-frequency signals. These are designed for deep-sea divers working in high-pressure zones, he explained. They block sonic disorientation, which means if she tries to lull us into a trance, it won't work. The only downside? Once we put them on, we wouldn't hear each other, so we had to rely on hand signals and sonar communication. It was a trade-off, but one we had to make. Dr. Santiago and Anna designed the capture cage, but this wasn't any ordinary cage. This was a titanium-reinforced submersible, built to withstand high-pressure attacks from below. We made 3 key modifications. Electrified grid, the moment she touched it, a powerful shockwave would be triggered. Motion-sensing doors, programmed to close at the exact moment of entry. No delay. Water turbine reinforcement. If she tried to break it apart, the turbines would counter her force by using the water's own resistance. We don't just want to capture her, I reminded the team. We need to make sure she doesn't escape. Even with all this, we had to prepare for failure. If the mermaid fought back or tried to destroy the cage, we needed something to subdue her. Enter the harpoon drones. Small, remote-controlled underwater projectiles armed with non-lethal tranquilizers. Heat-sensitive targeting only locks onto living heat signatures. Instant sedation, a mix of ketamine and deep-sea cephalopod toxin designed to neutralize movement within seconds. Tethered retrieval. If she was hit, she'd be reeled back into the cage immediately. Anna ran a final diagnostic. If she tries to escape, we have a 2-second window to take her down. That was all we needed. With everything in place, we finalized the plan. 1 shot, 1 chance. Step 1, lure. We would use a simulated distress beacon at the site of past disappearances, mimicking human drowning sounds. Step 2, bait. A fake diver, weighted and dressed like a fisherman to simulate prey. Step 3, capture. The moment she entered the trap, the doors would close and the electrified grid would keep her contained. Step 4, evacuation. If something went wrong, we had 2 minutes before she could break free. After that, all bets were off. We leave at dawn, I said, gripping the edge of the table. This time, we don't just listen to the song, we're going to answer it. A deep hum, distant but unmistakable, the mermaid's song, carried by the wind. Before I faced the mermaids, before we set out to capture her, there was one thing I had to do first. I had to tell my family. The house smelled the same, old wood, salt, and the faint trace of incense from my grandmother's prayers. It was small, just like I remembered, but the walls felt heavier somehow, like the years had pressed into them, holding the weight of memories I hadn't yet uncovered. My mother was the first to see me. She stood by the kitchen, her hands gripping a rosary, her face pale. "Luis," she whispered, "I know why you're here, but please don't do this." A distant clap of thunder, as if the sea itself was listening. She sat me down at the kitchen table, her eyes searching mine. The way she looked at me, it wasn't anger, it was fear. "I spoke to Lola Essing this morning," she began. "She said the sea has been restless." "You don't believe in that stuff, Ma," I said, forcing a smile. "You always told me the legends were just stories to scare kids." Her grip on the rosary tightens, the wooden beads clicking together. Not this one, she whispered. Not this one, Luis. I know you think this is about your father, she continued, her voice low. And maybe in a way it is, but you're making a mistake if you think you can control what's in the water. I exhaled. I don't want to control it, I just want the truth. A shadow crosses her face, something unreadable, something hidden. She hesitated. Then finally, she whispered, "You should talk to your Lola. She's the only one left who knows, at least, what little we were allowed to know." The weight of her words lingers. What little we were allowed to know, something was missing. Lola Essing's house was on the edge of the village, close enough to hear the ocean whisper at night. I found her sitting in a rocking chair, a small candle flickering beside her. She doesn't turn when I step inside. Instead, she speaks, like she knew I was coming. "The sea already knows your name, child. You always knew I would come back, didn't you?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You have your father's stubbornness." The candle flickers as the wind picks up. "I need to know the truth, Lola, about the mermaid, about why my father was taken." For the first time, she looked at me directly, and in her eyes, I saw something I didn't expect: pity. She sighed, long and slow, and reached for a small wooden box beside her. Inside was a tarnished silver pendant, shaped like a fishhook, but the metal was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. "This belonged to your father," she said softly. "It was found on the shore the day he disappeared." I ran my fingers over the pendant, feeling the cold weight of it. "He never wore anything like this," I murmured. Lola Essing nodded. "That's because he didn't get it from here." The wind outside howls, shaking the thin walls of the house. The fire crackles, its glow dancing across her weathered face. "Your father had a debt, Luis," she finally admitted. "One that he could never repay." A lump forms in my throat. "Debt?" I echoed. "What kind of debt?" She hesitated. "A debt of life. A single drop of rain falls onto the windowsill. He took something from the sea, and in return, the sea took him." Clenched my jaw. "That doesn't explain anything, Lola. What did he take?" A long silence. Then, finally, she shakes her head. "I don't know the full story," she whispered. "But I know this, he was not supposed to have what he had, and whatever it was something the mermaid wanted back." A sharp gust of wind rattles the house, sending a shiver down my spine. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes darken. "Because some truths are better left buried." The storm outside grows louder. The flickering candle casts shadows on the wall. There were holes in her story, gaps that didn't make sense. What exactly did my father take from the sea? Why was the pendant found on shore the day he disappeared? Why did the mermaid wait so long before taking him? The weight of the question settled over me like a heavy fog. "Lola, if the debt was paid when he vanished, then why is the mermaid still watching our family?" She froze. Her fingers tightened around her rosary. She didn't answer. The sound of the waves outside, they almost sound like a whisper, like a lullaby. Before I left, Lola Essing reached for my wrist, gripping it with unexpected strength. "Listen to me, Luis," she whispered. "You think you are hunting her, but she is always hunting you." The rain slows, almost like the sea itself is holding its breath. "She knows what you are planning. She knows why you are back." "You mean she's been waiting for me?" She never stopped waiting. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just chasing the truth was chasing me. We were almost ready to set sail. Every piece of equipment was checked, double-checked, then checked again. We weren't just going on some deep-sea fishing trip. We were stepping into a battlefield. As I tightened the straps on my gear, a voice called out from behind me. "Luis." I turned to see Mang Lando, the old fisherman who had known my father. He stood by the docks, his wrinkled hands gripping the edge of a wooden post. His eyes, dark, knowing, held something I hadn't seen before: pity. "I heard what you're planning," he said. A gust of wind carried the scent of salt and something older, something deep. I exhaled. "Then you know why I have to do this." The old man doesn't blink. "Do you?" His voice was heavy, laden with something I couldn't name. "You think you're going after a beast, a monster, something you can trap, study, control." His grip tightened on the wooden post, his knuckles pale. "But do you even know who the real enemy is? a long, heavy silence. The waves whisper against the hull of the boat. "You think there's only one?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I frowned. "What do you mean?" Manglando shook his head. "There's never just one. There are many. Some are hunters, yes, but some are not. Some have tried to warn us. Some have tried to help." A slow chill spreads down my spine. "You don't know which one you're chasing, do you?" he murmured. "And if you don't know that, then tell me, Luis, what exactly are you trying to accomplish?" A knot formed in my stomach. I thought I knew. I thought this was simple. Find the mermaid, capture her, uncover the truth. But if there were more than one, if some of them were innocent, then what were we really doing? A cold gust of wind rattles the crates, and for the first time I hesitate. "Not all creatures of the deep want to kill us, kid," Manglando sighed. "But some want something far worse." A deep hum drifts in the air, distant but familiar, the echo of a song carried by the wind. We set sail at dawn. The crew was quiet, focused. The weight of Manglando's words pressed down on all of us, but there was no turning back. Metallic clanks as Captain Torres secures the diving cage. A final checklist beep from the sonar system. Dr. Santiago adjusted his headset. "We're approaching the coordinates. ETA 1 hour. Ana Delgado checked the harpoon drones. The moment she's in range, we lock on." I sighed. I tightened my grip on the ship's rail. I thought about my father, the stories, the warnings, and for the first time, I wondered if we were about to make a terrible mistake. The waves crash against the hull. A deep, rumbling hum echoes beneath the surface. "We're entering the drop zone," Torres announced. "Depth 300 meters. A faint static crackles in the earpieces, followed by an eerie silence. The sea was too calm, no birds, no wind, just an endless black horizon. "Something's down there," Dr. Santiago muttered, adjusting the thermal scanner. But the beeping quickens. There's more than one. I felt my stomach drop. We lowered the simulated distress beacon, designed to mimic the sound of a drowning human. A pre-recorded cry echoes through the water, bouncing off the depths. The sea remained still for a moment. Then, the song began, soft and impossible to ignore. A voice, no voices, whispering through the waves, gentle, inviting. "Do you hear that?" Anna whispered. A low, distorted hum crawls through the ship's speakers. "She's here." A sudden, violent impact shakes the boat. The water exploded, something massive rising from below. The surface split apart, revealing a shadow too large to be just one creature. A guttural shriek cuts through the air. "Jesus Christ, there's more than one!" The sonar screen flickers, multiple heat signatures circling. A second hit, then a third. Something was testing the hull. Anna reaches for the harpoon controls, fingers trembling. What do we do? Then I make the call. Deploy the cage. Now. The heavy metallic groan of the submersible cage dropping into the abyss. The moment it hit the water, the song changed. No longer inviting, now it was screaming. A monstrous shadow darts toward the trap and vanishes. "She's not falling for it," Dr. Santiago muttered, his fingers tightening around the control panel. Then a whisper crawled through the speakers. "Luis." My blood froze. "She knows your name," Anna whispered, voice shaking. Static crackles, then a flash of movement. A figure lunges for the cage, the door snaps shut. A loud, inhuman wail shakes the ocean itself. Silence. The bait had worked. We had her. But as the cage rattled violently, as the shadows beneath the waves multiplied, I realized something else. We had caught one, but the others were coming. The ship trembles, the sonar screen glows red. I exhale, gripping the rail, heart hammering. "Brace yourselves," I whispered. "This isn't over." A massive wave crashes against the ship, and the darkness beneath the sea begins to rise. The ocean is alive with motion. The sound of waves crashing against the hull, the panicked shouts of the crew. "Get us out of here!" Captain Torres bellowed, his hands gripping the controls as the ship groaned under pressure. The sonar beeped erratically, a frenzy of red signatures closing in front all directions. "They're everywhere!" Anna shrieked, frantically recalibrating the harpoon drones. "There's too many!" The metal bars of the submersible cage rattled violently, the captured mermaid inside writhing, her long, shimmering tail slamming against the walls. "Let me go!" she cried, her voice sharp, desperate. "You have to let me go if you don't." a sickening crunch. Something beneath the boat gave way. "What was that?" Dr. Santiago shouted, his face pale. The ship lurched sideways, sending us sprawling as something massive rammed into the hull. "It's them," I whispered, my blood turning to ice. "They're tearing us apart." The first mermaid breached the surface, her face a twisted mockery of human beauty. Pale, stretched too thin, with black eyes that reflected nothing but hunger. Her jagged, needle-like teeth gleamed as she launched herself into the deck. A gunshot rang out. Captain Torres fired his harpoon pistol, but she dodged unnaturally fast, her body twisting in ways that weren't meant for land. "They're on board!" Anna screamed. Then the slaughter began. Wet, slick sounds, flesh tearing, bones snapping. I saw it happen before I could even blink. Dr. Santiago, the first to die. He tried to run, but they were too fast. One of the mermaids, her skin slick and gray, grabbed him by the jaw. Her claws sank into his face as she wrenched his mouth open. She ripped his lower jaw off. Blood sprayed across the deck, mixing with the sea spray. He choked on his own screams, his body convulsing as the mermaid dug her claws into his exposed throat and pulled. I heard the splintering of cartilage, the snapping of his windpipe. Then she dragged him over the edge. His body vanished into the sea. The second mermaid pounded on Captain Torres before he could reload. "Fight back, you fucking bastards," he roared, swinging a combat knife. It didn't matter. She clawed through his stomach with one swipe. His insides spilled onto the deck in a wet, steaming heap. He gasped, staring down in shock as his own intestines coiled at his feet. Before he could react, they tore him apart. One mermaid took his arm, another his leg, each limb ripped clean off, muscle and sinew snapping like a rubber bands. His torso hit the floor, his mouth still open in a silent scream before another mermaid bit into his throat and ended it. I scrambled backward, my breath shallow, ragged. "Anna! Where's Anna?" The ship lurched again, a massive hole ripped through the side. "Luis!" Anna screamed, but I was already falling. I hit the deck hard, my head slamming against the metal grating. The world tilted, blurred, and then I was falling further. Overboard. Into the water. Into their world. I opened my eyes. Shapes moved in the distance. Too many. The mermaids, dozens of them. Some circling the sinking ship, others tearing apart what was left of my team. Anna was still alive, barely. One of the mermaids had her by the hair, dragging her down. Anna's eyes met mine, wide with terror. "Help me!" she screamed, bubbles bursting from her lips. I swam for her, ignoring the burning pain in my lungs, but it was too late. Another mermaid grabbed her legs and pulled in the opposite direction. She was ripped in half, her lower half upper body twitching as the blood bloomed around her like ink. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I was going to die. But then, a sudden sharp whistle cut through the chaos. The mermaids froze. Something else was in the water, something different. A shape, tall, glowing faintly in the darkness. It was her, the mermaid we had captured. She had escaped the cage. She moved fast, faster than the others, her form cutting through the sea like a blade. One of the feral mermaids lunged for me, but she stopped them. A sharp, commanding click, a warning. The others hesitated. Then she grabbed me, strong hands wrapping around my waist, and we shot upward, faster. The surface exploded around us. Air. I was breathing air. She pulled me onto floating debris, her golden eyes watching me carefully. For a moment, we just stared at each other. "I tried to warn you, you didn't understand." And then, I passed out. The sound of gentle waves lapping against jagged rocks, water dripping from unseen cracks above. The air is damp, heavy with the scent of salt and something ancient. The first thing I noticed when my eyes adjusted to the darkness was how silent the world had become. No howling wind, no crashing waves, just the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water against stone. We had come ashore at what seemed like a forgotten place, a small rocky island that wasn't on any map. It wasn't a beach, it wasn't land, it was something in between. I coughed, my ribs aching from the brutal escape. The mermaid, no, the woman, stood before me, her glowing golden eyes dimmed now, reflecting only exhaustion and something else, sadness. She was changing. The moment we reached the rocky surface, her long shimmering tail darkened into smooth, bare legs. Her skin, once cool and iridescent beneath the waves, now looked warm, human. And her face, she was beautiful. Not the eerie, unsettling beauty of the mermaids in myths, but something different, something familiar. For a moment, I thought I was looking at my mother. A chill ran through me. "You need to listen," she said, her voice softer now, like a whisper carried by the wind. "And when I am done, you must never return to the sea." The cave walls seemed to hum as she began to speak, as if the sea itself were listening. "Your father and I, we were never meant to meet," she began. "But the ocean, it does not obey rules, nor does it follow the desires of men." I swallowed hard, my body aching, my mind racing. "What do you mean?" I asked. She took a slow breath, as if the memory itself was something she had been afraid to unearth. "Your father, he saved my life." A sharp gust of wind rattled the cave. A flash of something, not my memory but hers, and suddenly, I wasn't just hearing her words, I was seeing them. The scene shifts, blurring like water rippling under the moonlight. A younger version of her, the same golden eyes, the same haunting beauty, thrashing in a net, gasping, struggling. "It had been a stormy night when your father found me," she continued. "Fishermen had cast their nets too deep, and I was caught. The waves were rough, the net tight around her body, cutting into her flesh. She screamed, but no one could hear beneath the roar of the storm, until he appeared. A man, young, strong, with Luis's same sharp eyes, diving into the water, knife in hand. "He shouldn't have helped me," she whispered. "He should have let me die." The blade sliced through the net, setting her free, and when she turned, her eyes met his, and he did not run, he did not scream, he stayed. The vision shifts, weeks, maybe months, flashing like moments in the tide. "We met in secret," she continued, her voice almost a lament. "Again and again, your father should have feared me, but instead he loved me." The images flickered, her hand in his, laughter under the full moon, stolen moments between two souls that should never have touched. The sea is a jealous thing, it does not give, it only takes. "But we were foolish," she whispered. "He was still a man, and I was still." She looked at her hands now, the faint traces of scales still lingering beneath the surface. One of us would have to pay the price. When the elders found out, they were furious. A human and a mermaid? It was unnatural. A trial was held beneath the waves, not for him, but for me. "I was given a choice," she said bitterly, "to end my life or to make a trade." She swallowed hard, and her voice wavered. "And so, I gave him my life." "What?" I breathed. Her golden eyes flickered. "The pendant, Luis," she whispered. "The one found on the shore the day your father disappeared. That was me." "It was never his," she continued. "It was mine, a symbol of the life I had given up so that he might live. But the sea, it does not forget a debt, Luis. It only delays the collection." And when the time came, the ocean took back what it was owed. "The people who disappeared," I started, voice barely a whisper. Her face darkened. "They were not victims of random attacks," she confirmed. "They were sacrifices. To repay my crime, the ocean demanded lives in return, every 3 years, and when there were no more names left to take, it came back for the one who made the trade, your father." Then, she looked at him differently now, not with sorrow, not with pity, with recognition. "Luis," she whispered, "you remind me so much of him." She reached out, her fingers hovering just above my cheek, as if afraid to touch me. "There is a reason the ocean has always called to you," she continued, "a reason you have never felt whole. Because you are not just your father's son," she whispered. "You are mine too." The cave trembled, and the truth finally, fully broke free. The cave remains silent, except for the rhythmic dripping of water. The air feels heavier, pressing against me like the weight of the ocean itself. I stared at her, at the woman who was my mother, at the creature I had been hunting, the one I had blamed for everything. But now, everything was different. You're telling me that I'm not just..." She nodded, her golden eyes reflecting the dim light of the cave. "You are not just your father's son, Luis. You are of the sea as much as you are of the land. You have always been caught between two worlds, whether you knew it or not." "Then why?" I whispered. "Did the sea take him? What exactly happened to my father?" Her expression darkened. The wind shifts, and suddenly the world changes. A flashback, one not just told but felt. The night my father was taken, it wasn't a random tragedy. It wasn't bad luck. It was a reckoning. The vision unfolds. My father, standing on the beach, the same pendant clutched in his hand, as if he knew, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Your father knew his time was up, my mother said. When the cycle came again, when the 3 years had passed, he knew the sea would come back for him. The waves were calm that night, too calm. No wind, no movement, just waiting. So he didn't run, I murmured, watching the memory play out before me. She shook her head. No, he walked into the water. He met his fate head on. A lump formed in my throat as I watched my father take slow steps forward, the tide reaching for him like long, ghostly fingers. He thought he was paying the price alone, she continued, but the sea does not bargain fairly. A sharp ripple in the water, a dark shape emerging beneath the waves. The elders of my kind were waiting for him, she said, and they did not just take him. A cold, hollow scream filled the vision as the water erupted around him. Hands, not human hands, grabbing, pulling, twisting. His body vanished beneath the waves, consumed. They unmade him, she whispered, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the memory of what he once was. I choked back the bile rising in my throat. Then, he's dead, I said, voice shaking. Completely gone? She hesitated. Not in the way you understand death, she murmured. His soul belongs to the water now. The vision fades. The cave returns to the dim silence, the weight of what I'd seen pressing down on me. Then why can't I go back? I asked. If I'm part of the sea, why can't I? Her eyes sharpened. Because you are a reminder of what should never have existed. My breath caught in my throat. You are proof of a crime, she continued. A violation of the laws that have governed our kind for centuries. If they find out what I am, I murmured. She nodded. They will finish what they started, and they will erase you. I exhaled, my hands shaking as I ran them through my damp hair. Then what do? I asked. What am I supposed to do now? She hesitated, stepping closer, her presence both comforting and heartbreaking. Live, Luis, she whispered. Live the life your father fought for. Stay on land, stay away from the ocean. It is the only way to survive. You will hear it, she continued. The song, the calling, it will try to pull you back, but you must resist. She reached out, placing her cool hand against my chest, just above my heart. This is the only thing keeping you human, she murmured. As long as you hold on to it, they cannot take you. But if I let go? I asked. Her eyes darkened. Then you will belong to the sea. You have to go, Luis, she says. You cannot stay here. I swallow hard, my mind racing with everything I have learned, everything I have lost. And what about you? I ask. What will happen to you? She smiles, a sad, distant smile, as if she already knew the answer. I am already lost to the ocean, she whispers. But you still have a choice. Then the wind shifts, carrying the first hints of morning. It was time to leave. I take one last look at her, the woman who gave me life, who sacrificed everything for love, the woman I had once hunted. And then I turned away. As I stepped out of the cave, back into the waking world, I knew one thing for certain. I could never return to the sea again. And yet, the waves still whispered my name. I walked alone. The weight of the night clung to me, thick and heavy, as if the ocean itself was pressing against my chest, refusing to let go. The others were dead. Anna, Dr. Santiago, Captain Torres. Their bodies would never be found, swallowed by the dark waters that had always taken more than they gave. And yet, I had survived. I shouldn't have. By all logic, I should be at the bottom of the sea, nothing but a memory. But she had saved me, my mother, the one I had tried to capture, the one I had blamed for everything, the one I had never known, the one I would never see again. The realization left a hollow ache in my chest, one that I wasn't sure would ever fade. Manglando was waiting for me when I returned to the village. His old, knowing eyes took me in, the bruises, the exhaustion, the silence. He didn't ask what had happened, he already knew. So, he murmured, looking out at the sea, you learned the truth. I swallowed hard, nodding. And now, he asked, his voice quieter now, what will you do? I turned away from the waves, forcing my feet to take me farther inland. I'll live, I whispered. That's all I can do. Months passed. I stayed inland as far from the ocean as possible. I took a job repairing boats instead of sailing them. I avoided the beaches, the docks, the water. I never listened to the waves, never let them whisper to me again. And yet, even in my sleep I heard it. The song, the quiet hum of something waiting just beneath the surface, calling my name, and each time, it became harder to ignore. One evening, I found myself sitting on my small balcony, staring out toward the distant horizon, the vastness of the ocean stretching beyond the hills. My fingers absently traced the pendant around my neck, the one that had once belonged to her, the one my father had held before the end. It was cold to the touch, colder than it should be. Then I noticed something. The pendant, it was wet. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't been near water all day, and yet it was dripping. Salt water pooled in my palm, trailing down my wrist in thin, glistening streams. "No," I whispered. "Not now, not again." I tried to pull it off, but my fingers wouldn't move. The weight of it pressed against my chest, tightening, like invisible hands pushing me down, dragging me back. And then, from the distant shore, I saw her, a silhouette standing in the shallows, her golden eyes glowing against the twilight. Waiting. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of salt, of the tide, of something older than time itself. The song grew louder. I stood, trembling, my feet inching forward against my will. A single step, another. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat matching the rhythmic pull of the tide. I had a choice, to turn away, to live the life I promised, to forget, or to go back, to surrender to what I was, to the truth, to the water. The ocean was waiting, the waves whispered, "Luis," and then one final breath. I wish I could tell you what I did next. I wish I could tell you that I stayed away. But the truth is, some calls are impossible to resist.